Welcome. This is a Freethinker Institute event on the subject of how to retire safely as a millionaire at the age of 65. Sharing us his tips on investments and personal finance is Garrett, the Executive Director of the Freethinker Institute. To join the discussion, you can find us on Discord. The link is in the description.
All right, so it's 7:05, so let's get started. Let me start off by sort of giving my regular intro, which is a couple of things. First of all, we're going to talk tonight about how to retire safely as a millionaire at age 65. The subtitle is, this is about personal finance, including budgeting, savings, and investing. So it's the safe path to doing this, as opposed to the risky path. You could go to a casino and bet on red or red 22 and hope that you're successful. Don't recommend that. The odds are against you. I'm going to teach you how to make the odds ever in your favor. So that said, I'm going to give a quick intro to the Freethinker Institute, which is my not-for-profit. We're really trying to create a warm, open-minded community that helps people in both personal and professional growth to maximize happiness and minimize harm. Doesn't that sound good overall? Seems like something we should all be going after, and we want to help each other go after it and help each one of us be the best version of ourselves, which is the goal of the organization. And, there's a lot more to it. I don't want to dwell on it, but I will put the links to the online community and the website in the chat so that anyone that's interested can look at those. The online community is where we stay in touch with each other throughout the week. And in between lectures or conversations, really, like this will be a little bit lecture, but the next thing that I want to tell you is this should be a conversation. Like I prefer conversations rather than lectures. So I want you guys to feel very comfortable talking over me, and just like when you have a question, just start talking over me. I have no problem with that. I would much rather you talk over me. We like ask the question or have you ask the question in context than that we wait till later and then the context is lost and the question, you may not even remember it. And even if you do, it'll be out of context. So please do feel free to interrupt me. I encourage interruptions rather than discourage them. I know that's unconventional, but that's just kind of how I like to do things. And so I want to encourage people to do that. So that said, any questions before we get started? I see a nod. Is that a question or is that a ready to get started?
I'm ready to go. I'm excited.
All right, good to see you. All right, so we're going to, agenda-wise, we're going to talk about what you'll be able to accomplish, because it's nice to sort of set your goals really high. And I like to say, set your goals high, but be happy with where you land. But we will set our goals high, and I'll explain that actually you have a very good probability of landing there if you follow the advice. It's not trivial. It does take work. I don't want to say this is a get-rich-quick scheme. It's really not. It's about being smart with your money and using it to your advantage. And I'm going to talk about what this class costs. Nobody paid to come here, but there is a cost to the class, and I'll explain how it works. And it's kind of an optional thing, but it's encouraged. I'll talk a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from when giving this advice, so that you understand that I do have a good idea of what I'm talking about. And then I'll talk a little bit about cash flows, debt management, investment. Cash flows will get you to make sure that your cash flows are positive. Debt management helps you reduce payment on outgoing debt that outgoing payments on debt that you may have, which you want to get rid of right away. And then investment is about once you have money to invest, and I'll talk about when to start investing as compared to managing your debt. And then overall, we'll talk about measuring and increasing net worth. All right, so what I can do for you. So, and let me, I have a legal disclosure. So first of all, what I can do for you is I will explain how you can retire at age 65 as a millionaire. Now, mind you, this advice assumes that someone is starting when they're coming right out of college. So it's particularly good for college students, but you can start later in life. It's never too late to start. And if you are off to a good start already, you might not have any problem. If you're making more than minimum wage in New York City, minimum wage is $15, and that's what I assume in the model, then you're probably going to be able to catch up. And I'll talk about how you can live debt-free. It's much less stressful to live debt-free, and how you can also save for vacations and big expenses and a house. It does require discipline and compromise, but you can do it if you want to. It just takes discipline and staying focused on following this advice. And this recording will be up on YouTube afterwards, so you can recall it. Yeah, go ahead, Sanjay.
So, Mr. Lang, I heard that if you find somebody rich, you can't still think that that's an income you can rely on. I heard you're supposed to rely on one income of a dual income household. So if I found like Paris Hilton or like
Right.
some celebrity, I'm just throwing it out there.
Right.
I can't rely on that income. Is that true? How would you do two spouses do it parallel, or what do they do for the goals?
So great question. I will not address let's put it this way. The lecture doesn't specifically address where the money is coming from. So it can be kind of ambiguous. It can be from one earner, it could be from two. It's irrelevant to the savings and investment advice that I give. That said, I think every individual has to choose the right path for them. And, some people choose to have one high wage earner and one, at-home parent, and that's a perfectly acceptable decision from my perspective. The only thing I would say is if you're married to someone that is a Paris Hilton and she's not very nice to you, then you have to consider that you may want to have your own means of making money in case things don't work out. But if,
I was just throwing a hypothetical. Yeah. Thank you.
No, and I'm just saying I don't know Paris very well, so I don't know what she's like as a wife. So I'm not trying to make any judgments on Paris. I'm just saying for each of our own benefit, I think ultimately it's I think it's best to be able to be self-reliant if you need to. And I think even if someone is a homemaker for decades, they can go back into the workforce. Part of what the Free Thinker Institute's goal is professional development, and it's helping people get the professional skills that they need to enter a new career that they may not have any experience in. And we have a boot camp in product management that I teach. I've been doing product management for 20 years to get people that skill set. I'm thinking about doing a QA boot camp as well, which is an easier thing to learn than product management. And we're going to probably try to add other boot camps to that. So I do think that even in all cases, the long story short, I don't really have a strong opinion on whether the money comes from one or two people. I don't think it's necessarily important, and a couple partners need to figure that out amongst themselves. So it's mostly about not wasting money and basically applying the advice that I give. And basically the way that this works is if you follow my advice, when you retire at age 65, you will be making as much from investment income as you made when you were working, except you're not working. And so you're literally at the same income level that you were when you were working, except you're not working. And so now you're retired, but you're not having to reduce your quality of life or anything like that. And you're also not, tapping into your savings. You're keeping your savings flat, which, you can only do for a certain amount of time because there's inflation. And so that money becomes worth less and your income becomes worth less. But all things told, once you're 65, if you're lucky, you got 35, 40 years to go. And so, working on the same income for 35 or 40 years for inflation's sake is probably okay. And if you needed to, you could tap into some of those savings. So that said, that's kind of what I'm going to teach. I do need to give a legal disclaimer, which is that nothing in this lecture constitutes professional and/or financial advice, nor does any information provided constitute a comprehensive or complete statement of the matters discussed or the law related hereto. I am not a fiduciary by virtue of any person's use of the information taught in this lecture. And then the caveat that I'll give is the reason I have to give this legal disclosure is because There are people who are, legally fiduciaries that give financial advice, and they charge a lot more money than I do, and they give better performance. They're not better, sorry, they give worse performance than I'm generally giving you, and they make money off the advice, whereas I'm not making money off the advice. And unfortunately, if I don't give that disclaimer and tell you that what I'm going to tell you tonight is the way that I invest my money, and you can choose how you want to invest your money, I'm not giving you advice on how to invest your money. I'm simply sharing with you how I invest my money, and you can do what you want with that advice. And that's my carefully communicated way of saying that people who make a lot more money than most of society charge a lot of money for financial advice, and what I'm giving can displace that in some respects. And so I don't want to like purport to be them. I'm not them, and I don't have the fiduciary qualifications. But I have invested my own money, and I want to share how I've invested my own money and how it's helped me, and how I've learned that it can be statistically significantly beneficial to people who want to use that comment that I made earlier about imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. I'll tell you how I do it. If you want to imitate, that's totally up to you at your own risk. But I will tell you what the risks are and what they're not, from my perspective. And you can decide what to believe for yourself, because at the end of the day, the Freethinker Institute is all about everybody thinking for themselves. And we want to help people develop their critical thinking skills so they can make their own decisions rather than following other people blindly. So all of that said, what you'd pay for worse advice than mine, those fiduciaries will charge $2,000 to $3,000 a month minimum for retainers to provide investment advice. Usually their performance will be worse than mine. It is a little like a casino where you get different risks and returns depending on whose advice you follow. And some people bet on big winners and they get big returns. My path that I've chosen to invest in is a very safe path with a very good expected average return. And I'll talk about, I take a little bit of additional risk that has done well for me, but I also have some of my savings in a lower risk strategy, and I'll talk about both the lower risk strategy and the increased risk strategy in the investment side. So that said, if you do ever decide to get an investment advisor, my advice would be to, and some of them charge a percentage of assets, like 1 or 2% of all of the money that you have in your savings per year. And so that's obviously generally depending on your savings. Usually if they want to spend time with you, that's more than $2,000 to $3,000 a month. That said, if you do decide to get an investment advisor, my advice would be create a shadow portfolio with my advice and compare it to the advice you're getting. And if you end up, deciding that you want to change course later, you can decide to, change course if you want to. That said, I would guess that more than half the time, I'll do better than a typical financial advisor is going to recommend you. And fiduciaries, by the way, do have a legal responsibility to put your financial interests before their own. And so that's part of what makes them a fiduciary. But I will also tell you that a lot of them have products that they sell that make them more money than products that they sell that don't make them as much money. And I definitely know people that have had products sold to them that were the products that made the fiduciary the most amount of money and didn't have the greatest return on investment. That said, like, those are anecdotes, like, not trying to badmouth the entire industry, because there's lots of very high integrity people. And I know some, I have friends that are fiduciaries, and they're very responsible and they're very good at what they do. And everybody has to make a living. They make a living providing investment advice, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing to do when it's done ethically, and it's supposed to always be done ethically. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So what this class costs, I told you I would tell you that. The class costs $500. And the reason is people don't value what doesn't cost money. So I'm going to charge you $500 for this class, but here's my deal. You don't have to pay now. So there's no payment thing in the chat. So basically you're guaranteed to not just double your money, but make $2,500 in profit at this price. And so what I would say is if you follow this advice and you don't make, basically if you follow this advice and in the next 3 to 4 years, you make $3,000 following my advice, I would love for you to give a tax deductible donation to my not-for-profit of $500 to pay for this course. And if I'm really diligent, I'll send you an email 3 to 4 years from now and ask you whether or not you made more than $3,000, and then you can decide. And if I'm not that diligent, you'll never get the email, and it'll be total honor system either way. It's the honor system because I don't know how much money you make. But that said, you know, that's my the reason for that, by the way, is you know, A, I want to like share good ideas with more people, but B, like people don't value what they don't pay for. So you know, I hope that this lecture will be useful to you and that you'll find it valuable. And so I'm charging you $500 for it so that you'll find it useful. So my background, I worked for G Capital for over 10 years, which was voted best managed company in the world almost every year that I was there. When I was, you know, part of my career, I worked for a mutual fund, which is how a lot of wealthy people invest their retirement. The ultra wealthy invest in hedge funds. A lot of people invest in mutual funds as well, which are, you know, regulated. Hedge funds are not regulated. I've spent hundreds of hours researching personal finance. I've read dozens of books on personal finance. I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers and Google. So I have, you know, pretty much been quite successful in inventing software. And so I'm an innovator. And so I'm pretty good at recognizing good ideas. I like to say in product management, it's more valuable if you can recognize a good idea than to come up with good ideas, although I like to think I can do both, and have won awards for doing both. That said, you know, I think I recognized what advice was good advice and what advice was not good advice from all of these sources in my life. And then I put together my savings and investment strategy based on, you know, what I thought was good advice. And you guys can use your own judgment to say whether or not you think it's good advice. So that said, the first thing that I recommend is looking at your cash flows in. Your job is one income source. It can also be a good idea to start a small business. A lot of books talk about that to supplement your regular income. I'm a big believer in sort of the side hustle, and I recruit people for side hustles for my startup, usually in sales and marketing, but in other fields as well. And I think that's a good way to use your spare time in a way that can help monetize your spare time and make you additional income in your spare time. You know, there have been lots of examples of people who did side hustles and it turned out to make them more money than their full-time jobs. And so they did it full-time. And so I think that, you know, time is the one resource that we have, you know, a totally finite amount of. And so it's good to spend it as intelligently as you can. Sanjay.
Yes, so related to this idea of side hustles, I've studied cases where people retire in their 40s, and like you said, one of the spouses will continue working to provide insurance. What are your thoughts on if somebody has all these side hustles? Does it make sense for them to retire early? Because people are living longer and longer lives.
Totally.
Like there's no telling how long you're going to live. So it'd be risky to kind of retire early, right? Like, I mean, and then what would you do anyway in retirement? But do you see that with some of your clients? Like they have all these cash flows, like you're saying, and they figured out some of the elements and they just decide to retire really early before 60.
So I do know people that retired early, that some of whom, you know, maybe retired too early and then had to be very careful with their money. And so there's a risk of that. And so you just have to, like, you know, if you have $10 million and you're making a 10% return per year, you're probably not going to worry about money for the, you know, for the remainder of your life, even with inflation, because you have enough money that your investment returns plus, you know, are going to make enough money that you can pay your expenses, plus any, you know, anything additional that's going to come up. And plus inflation. And so you're fine. But like, you kind of have to be at a very secure place to decide you want to retire. Quite frankly, the other thing to consider is that there have been a lot of studies that say that people who are not mentally challenging themselves get dementia and other mental health problems as they get older. And so there's a lot to be said for keeping your mind sharp as you age, and working does that. There are other ways to do that, but I would encourage someone that if they do have enough money to retire early and they do want to retire early, just make sure that you're using your mental energy and keeping your relationships strong. That's another thing that really increases longevity, and that's part of the Free Thinker Institute, is trying to connect all of us with each other so that we can build friendships in this community that we're trying to create. And relationships actually increase your lifespan more than pretty much anything else. And so I want to create an organization that creates meaningful relationships of people who want to be the best version of themselves. And so we have a niche audience. Our niche audience is everybody that wants to be the best version of themselves. And if you want that, then wouldn't it be nice to have friends who want the same thing, and you help each other be the best version of yourselves? And so that's really the vision of the Free Thinker Institute. And what I would say is, yeah, like if you're gonna retire, just keep mentally sharp and volunteer for a not-for-profit or something like that. The Free Thinker Institute is a not-for-profit you can volunteer for, but whatever you want to do to keep yourself mentally sharp, I think is really important.
And Garrett, related to that, I don't want to interrupt or anything, but there are the people that will have their money by going overseas. Like one of my financial advisors told me about the Nomad Capital. I don't know if you've heard of the Nomad Capital. So some people will like go to Thailand. And the thing I'm thinking is you would need to have some sort of burning desire if you're going to go overseas. Because I thought about it, Portugal or some other place, like, okay, what would I do there? And I would think it's more of a summer thing. And then the idea of making a contribution to the United States while I'm abroad. You understand? Because I feel scared going to some other place, not having any kind of side hustle, like you said. Have you had clients that had the cash flow and then, you know what, I'm going to double it and just go overseas? Have you had that? Or I don't
know anyone that's like retired overseas. And
I've done it. I'm about to quit my job and do it again, actually.
There you go.
I'm only 37 though. I'm not retiring, but I can get into it later. It is very possible. You could, I mean, I think this is kind of disruptive to the flow of what's being said, and it's not going to help you get into a rhythm, Garrett, but I'm just going to say there are benefits to moving somewhere. Your cost of living goes down, and then your income needed to do that goes down with it. You can live like a same lifestyle. You can live in New York for far less money somewhere else, for instance. And if you make money in a currency like the dollar and you're in a place you have a currency advantage, it just makes it all the more easier. But it's a lot going on there. So if you want, maybe we can talk about it a little later.
Yeah, and I think when you're 37, absolutely very little risk to doing that, because most 37-year-olds don't have major health problems. But if you do have major health problems,
yeah, healthcare is a big one.
Like, I don't know, like there are a lot of low-cost areas to live, but their healthcare is usually not very good, even if you do have more money than the average person in that country. And if you end up in a situation where you don't have enough money, there's also, unfortunately, a lot of ageism in the work market. And so if you ended up needing to go back to work, when you're 65, you may have a lot of trouble getting a reasonable salary, especially if you haven't been working for 20 years or 10 years. Then trying to get a new job at age 65 or 70 might be really hard. So especially from a foreign country. And so there's risks in doing that. Like, again, like there are pros and cons to everything. And I think you just have to kind of think through the pros and cons. I'm trying to lay out a couple of them without going into too much detail. So that said, you also want to look at your cash out, and you'll evaluate your current cash flow. Cash out is everything you spend money on every month. And what you should do is look at all your bank statements, credit cards, and try to not spend cash, or see how much money you withdraw from the ATM and keep track of how much cash you spend if you do spend a lot of money in cash. Although it's easier to keep track of with credit cards. And I don't recommend buying anything on debit cards. We'll get into that later. I recommend buying everything in credit cards, although it does take discipline to not spend money you don't have. But as long as you don't spend money you don't have, credit cards generally have much better benefits and much better safety than debit cards. So that said, you want to look at all your cash flows out. If you don't have 15% of your gross income left over when you look at your cash in and your cash out, then your cash flow is not good enough to do what I'm going to suggest. and you should really try to manage your expenses better. And I'll explain to you how you can manage your expenses better. So create a list of your expenses for the month. This is where I was talking about like scouring through your credit card bills, your bank statements, your cash expenditures. Look at everything you spend. And this is going to take time. But like I said, it's not easy, but it's worthwhile. And getting to that 15% mark is what's going to make all of this work. So it's really important to get there. If you're already there, cool. None of this is relevant and really not that important. But if you're not there, which at $15 an hour, you're probably not there. You're going to have to, spend a little bit of time and effort getting there. If you're not there, you want to look at each purchase and say, was this purchase really necessary? If not, just don't make a similar purchase the next time you're in that situation. And go ahead, Sanjay.
I'll let you finish your thought and then I'd weigh in. I just want to ask
something. So I was just going to say, like, if you're don't make a similar purchase next time, return the product if you still can. If you do think that the product was necessary, you want to look at, is there a less expensive product that would have been similarly effective? If there would have been a less expensive similar product, for example, when I'm buying shoes, I could buy a pair of Edmund Allens. I always get it backwards. Edmund Allens or Allen Edmonds. They're a $300 pair of shoes and they're beautiful, but they're a $300 pair of shoes. Could I buy a nice pair of, and like what I'm wearing now is like a $60 pair of dress shoes that are not quite as nice as the Edmund Allens, but they're very nice and they're actually more comfortable, which is why I ended up buying them. And, I used to, always have a pair of Edmund Allens when I was in the corporate world, and that was what I wore to work. But now I buy a less expensive, similarly effective product. And if so, I recommend doing that the next time to reduce expenses. And Sanjay, I want to let you speak.
Sure. So Garrett, related to that, it's funny you brought up shoes because I, for the first time, bought over $100 shoes. I think it was a couple months ago. I used to buy a lot of stuff from Walmart and like suits from Suit Outlet or some other place. And what I've noticed is, because I'm facing promotion, I really love my community college position. I teach online. I'm trying to look the part of growing into the next leadership. I'm like in a doctoral program. I'm trying to, I didn't even realize, like you don't even realize until you find higher quality suits, because I was always about like, I got to make sure it's in my budget, right? But then I'm realizing, oh my goodness, the quality's better, the shoes are better, and it creates a package and you feel better. And it's gotten to the point now where I think I'm going to trade in my SUV, which is nice, for like a black, there's federal kinds of SUVs, like a Wagoneer or something. And then like a nice sedan. Now, I know that costs more money, but what are your thoughts, Garrett? You mentioned that you worked in the corporate world, a very impressive resume. What is the idea of Parkinson's law, right? That idea of as you earn more money, you're also expanding. I'm beginning to realize, boy, that's at another level. Because I didn't even know, like, I'm missing that level. But then as you start changing, you start, oh, that makes sense at this level. Yeah. But do you have to do that? Or is that, because I know like Jeff Bezos, he drives a Honda Accord. Yeah. You understand? Like he's the world's richest person and he's driving a Honda Accord. Yeah. But he has a $500 million yacht. So what are your thoughts on like the lifestyle, spending money for that lifestyle while still saving that 15%?
Yeah. So I have found, how can I say this? Like, I think that you can look very good for less money if you're careful about how you spend your money and you look for high quality, low cost stuff. And so I think you really can look the part, and very few people, and probably none of the ones that are looking at whether or not you're going to get a promotion, will be able to tell the difference between a $250 suit versus an Armani suit. Now, mind you, my wife likes brands, so I generally wear Armani. So, but like, that's like her choice, right? Like for me, that's not important, but like, I don't think that ultimately, like, you're gonna like it. Like, I do think you need to look the part in the, like, when you're talking about promotion, like a lot of business advice is dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And I do think that's good advice. It's sound advice, but you don't have to spend the money to look the part if you spend it wisely. And when I say that, I don't mean like get the cheapest suit that looks nice. What I'm saying is you should be able to, at the salary you're at, keep 15% of your gross income as cash flow left over and still buy a good enough quality thing that you look the part for a promotion. Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate your feedback because I want to do everything that I can in terms of modeling that professionalism. I'm studying the deans, the president of the college. He's always positive, and I'm working on. I look at how he dresses. His suits are tailored. He drives a very nice car. Yeah, and I'm trying to study what these top leaders are doing, look like you're doing in the corporate world. And then as I'm changing my conduct and working on being positive and working through things, it just seems like it'll keep you at that level. Because it's just like, but I see where you're coming from. Like, but it's almost like, what, wouldn't it be bad to have like a black sedan or a black SUV? And now all of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah. And I do think like at the end of the day, if you can keep 15% of your gross salary left over, then, at that point, like, money is meant to be spent. You're not going to take it with you after you die. Like, I actually believe in life after death, and I still don't believe that money goes with you after you die. So that said, like, at the end of the day, what does go with us is the wisdom that we learned during our lives in some spiritual way. I think that we carry forward. And so that's why I think the best version of ourselves is what we should all be striving for, which is why that's the focus of the Freethinker Institute. That said, that's a topic for another day, like after, whether or not life after death exists. And I don't mean to digress on spiritual topics on a financial subject, which probably isn't of interest to most of the people that came tonight. So that said, I do have a good logical argument for believing that, which I'll explain another night, because I ultimately follow logic. I don't really have blind faith. Except the only blind faith I have is the blind faith that our ability, our own ability to reason is, good if we're really honest with ourselves. And so it's really blind faith in ourselves, in each one of you to think for yourselves and in me to think for myself. And I do trust each one of us to do that. And so that's as close to blind faith as I get. And I don't think it's really blind faith. So that said, you really do have to be strict with your spending until you have 15% of your gross salary left over. And I'll talk about why that's the magic number. I think that, there is wiggle room there, but like, I would just keep to it. It'll keep things simpler. And, if you need to move to a less expensive place to get to that 15%, like people's biggest expense is housing. And part of what I'm going to talk about is how some of this savings will go towards buying a property that you can live in. And if you keep money saved till you can afford a property that you can live in, you won't have to pay rent anymore, which is a lot of fun. Mortgages go up much slower than mortgages don't go up in payment amounts. Building maintenance fees in New York City do, which I learned. And so there are increased expenses when you're a homeowner, but like it's much more cost effective to be a homeowner. And you're also gaining in the real estate market because your equity, the value of your home is going up, and you're also paying off your mortgage. And so you're, as you pay off your mortgage, you're getting equity in your home ownership. And eventually you pay off your mortgage, hopefully. And then once you've paid off your mortgage, you have no rent. And so when you're retired, your biggest expense is gone and you're still making as much money as you did when you were working. Imagine that you're making the same amount of money you're making, except you have no rent payment, right? That's a good place to be. And that's what I can teach you how to do. So debt management, if you have credit card debt that's too big to pay off, you can usually negotiate a fraction of the debt to be paid off. And basically, there are debt negotiators, there are not-for-profits that do this. I recommend using a not-for-profit because they're not trying to make money off you. They're just trying to help you get out of debt. And so the last resort is to declare bankruptcy. If you literally have no way conceivably to pay off your debt, you're better off declaring bankruptcy. You can only do that once every, I think it's 7 years. I don't know because I've never done it. But you can't do it very often. But you can declare bankruptcy. It's a really bad idea. It's a last resort because hurts your credit a lot. But generally, you want to pay off the higher, and there are different pieces of advice on this. My advice is the financially best, maybe not the psychologically best, but the financially best strategy is to pay off your highest interest debt first. And you can, if you have a good credit score, you can get a credit card that has 0% interest for 12 months, sometimes 18 months, that will do a balance transfer like for a fixed percentage. And so if you're paying like 12 or 15 or 18% in credit card fees, you just get a new credit card, if you have the credit score to do that, that has interest free for 12 months and balance transfers that cost 2 to 3%. You transfer your whole balance over to the new credit card, and you're no longer paying interest for 12 months for that credit card. So that's a way that you can kind of like hack away at the credit card debt and take some of that highest interest debt and pay it off with a lower interest credit card. And then you basically have a year to pay that off. You pay off the highest interest debt remaining, and you want to get debt-free as quickly as possible. So that's, the first step, because debt is really generally the most expensive thing that you're going to pay for, and you need to be debt-free for this whole strategy to work. So you want to get debt-free as quickly as possible if you're not already. Basically, the long story short, if you have any debt that is more than 7 to 8% interest, which is most debt, mortgages are lower than that right now. They're like 3.5, 3.6%.
Student loan. Oh God.
What's that?
Student loan. I have a student loan that's like
Student
7. It's between 7 and 8%. It was just it's a racket. I mean,
student loans are like very frustrating. Like I'm a big believer that education should be free, because at the end of the day, it's an investment in the population. When you get higher education, you add more value to the workforce. And so like we should be supporting that higher level of education with public funds to get people more educated so they add more value to society. It's a win for everybody. So the whole student debt thing and the fact that college costs ridiculous amounts of money and the cost of college has gone up so much in the last 30 and 40 years is Seamus, you're touching on a touchy subject for me. So I think it's probably touchier for you than it is for me, but because I don't have student debt right now, but it is touchy for me too. And I understand where you're coming from, and I'm sorry you have to go through that.
Yeah, it's well, again, I don't want to throw a flow of this, but anyone else has a student loan with an interest rate that high can attest to just how poorly they're set up against you, and how it can direct your life very, very young towards certain directions just to deal with it. But yeah,
no, totally. And that's part of the challenge, is that you get people who are young professionals who are, bright-eyed people that want to change the world, and they have to focus on the job that pays enough money to pay off the student loans, rather than the job that's like the Hail Mary that's going to like create the next Facebook, right? And so, and Facebook's a bad example. The next TikTok, or
anything. If you want to be a teacher, or if you just want to help your community, or exactly. I had to do that because I worked in nothing but nonprofit and government, and I had a lot of student loan, and I took the risk doing that. But yeah, this is all like, I don't want to interrupt the flow of what you're saying. There's personal information.
I appreciate it. No, I love conversation, so I appreciate it, Seamus. And I actually would say 7-8% is really that middle ground where it's like, should I pay it off? Should I not pay it off? And I'll explain to you that 7-8%, you're probably better off not paying it off and just following, if you want to, my investment strategy, because you'll get a positive return just paying off the regular payments rather than paying off the student debt early.
Sure.
That said, you do want to pay the highest interest debt first, in my opinion, because that's the most expensive debt. That's what you pay the most interest on. A lot of books recommend paying off the smallest debt first, because it feels better to pay off more debts and have only one bigger debt. But I don't think that, like, financially, that doesn't make sense to me. If psychologically that will feel better to you and you'll be more motivated that way, okay, cool. But like, the financially best strategy is to pay off the highest interest debts first, because that's what's costing you the most money. So debt below 7 to 8%, you should retain and then move on to the next step, which we're going to talk about next. So first of all, I recommend creating an emergency fund with automatic withdrawals. Automatic withdrawals are a key step, and I learned this from a book. I don't remember which book, but it was a good book. And what they recommend doing is automatically withdrawing, a percentage of your salary. I'm going to recommend 15% of your gross salary into a standard non-retirement brokerage account, and then automatically investing that 15% in a way that you're comfortable with. And again, I'll tell you how I invest my money, and there are two ways really. And if you want to copy one of them, cool. And then basically you want to do that until the value of the account covers at least 6 months of all your cash outflows. So look at your living expenses, your cash outflows, and this is basically your emergency fund. Now you can, if you're worried that the stock market is going to crash, if right now, the general indicator of a stock market crash is the price per earning ratio of the entire index. And that has been a pretty good indicator of a crash in the past. So if you look at the price per earning ratio of the index, then, and you can look up what that is if you don't know off the top of your head. I can go into it if people want, if it's not clear, but basically it's the price that the value of stock versus the amount of money that all the companies that stock accounts for are making. And so if basically companies are overvalued in the stock market, then the stock market is probably ripe for a crash. And so in 2001 and in 2008, there were high PE ratios, and because of that, not because of that, but sort of because of that, there were bubbles that burst and the stock market crashed, and then it recovered within a few years both times. And that's what we've seen for the last 100 years, is that when the stock market crashes, it will recover within a few years. But an emergency fund you may need when the stock market crashes. So if you're worried that the stock market might crash, you can just avoid the automatic investments and keep that money in a bank account. We'll talk at the very end of the lecture about some banks that have good interest rates. There aren't really very many good interest rates right now in the market, but there are a few banks that have, quote unquote, good interest rates. A good interest rate right now is like 1%. So it's not a lot of money, but that's a really good interest rate. And I do know one bank that does that. That said, and I don't make money from any of these people from recommending them. It's just places that I've used. So I'm going to tell you who I use, and if you want to use them, cool. And if you find value, great. I love financial services advice, and that's why I'm doing this talk. So it's also something that people don't talk about a lot. Like, out of curiosity, am I wrong in saying that people don't talk a lot about financial advice with each other? Do a lot of you talk with your friends or family about financial services information?
Yeah, I would say that that's something that's sorely missing from just like financial planning, or a basic understanding of saying, like, even taking a loan, what interest is, or investment and how it's done. And at least at the school, elementary and high school level, non-existent, and even college to that degree. The same thing. And I went to the London School of Economics or grad school, and even they're not teaching you how to create wealth for yourself in that way. And amongst people themselves, you often hear people trading advice like, oh, invest in this cryptocurrency, or you should invest in this and stuff. And it's more just like hot topic stuff thrown around. The basics of how to create wealth for yourself is absent. Completely.
Anyone that tells you to invest in crypto and give them your bank account information, don't do it. So there's a lot of scammers out there, but there's also a lot of money that's been made in crypto. But yeah, congratulations on London School of Economics. Really great school.
That's where my debt came from. So not really.
Well, I mean, I can't tell you about that. You were probably an international student. They don't really charge the domestic students as much, right?
Yeah, so, I'm from Brooklyn, so it's not.
Yeah, so that's why. So and the US does the same thing. All schools charge the international students ridiculous amounts of money for going there. But it's a great school, great reputation. So congratulations on that. And I'm not surprised to hear an academic institution not teaching practical knowledge, because one of my like I really want to have a collaboration with academic institutions. And a guy named Neville was on our last meetup, and I'm talking with him about trying to create collaborations with academic institutions, really where academic institutions are great at teaching theory, but what I want the Freethinker Institute to do is to teach practical knowledge, absolutely practical, can apply it to day-to-day life types of knowledge. And I want to collaborate with academic institutions to teach practical knowledge in combination with their academic knowledge. With that said, Sanjay.
Sure, I love this discussion. And so I have a really good financial advisor I've been dealing with out of Raymond James named Roy McGuffin. Again, I know we're not endorsing anybody, but he's really good. You asked that question. And speaking about the academic institutions, I have some connections here we could talk about later. I would be happy to get you in. In my case, the federal government, like the government has been helping my family, like with jobs, education, and my brothers and I, and pretty much my whole family. So what's very exciting is I feel I'm at the stage now where I can kind of pay it forward. And I really feel like I have a good thing going. And I'd be very happy to help you with the institutions I'm involved with. There's a community college full-time that I have. And if you email me later, I could give you that contact and we can get you in there. I can have you present to my class.
Cool.
And
I would love to do that, Sanjay. Sanjay, are you in New York City?
I'm in Chesterfield, Virginia. And then where I teach is Alberta, Virginia.
Got it. No problem. I was going to take you out to dinner, but if you come to New York City, or if you want to come to New York City, let me know. I got a place for you to stay, and I'll buy you dinner and drinks. So
yes, I'm actually going to New York this summer.
Do you need a place to stay?
Absolutely.
Well, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. I have a place for you to stay. I can't promise I'll definitely have it then, but I do right now. And if I still have it, I'm happy to share it with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I would just say really quick also, there are a lot of communities I'm from Brooklyn and I grew up here. My family's all from New York City and I still live here currently, but there are a lot of communities in the 5 boroughs that are sorely needing just basic financial information about how things work. And there's many nonprofits and community organizations that are doing different things. And I'm sure if you reach out and offer to do some classes and stuff, just in terms of like volunteering knowledge to like underserved, underprivileged communities that desperately need it, there's probably a lot that needs to go on in that way. And so I don't know what your own predilections are with everything, but I'm just saying like that's a really well needed resource.
I'm really glad you're saying that. And if you have connections in New York City that of people that want to hear this lecture, the thing that's funny about you saying that is the reason I even created this lecture was because a friend of mine was on the block committee in Harlem, and I created this lecture to teach it to people in Harlem, and I'm still on the agenda to go there, but I actually ended up teaching it through the Freethinker Institute before Harlem, and for some reason my chat's not coming up. So I don't know why oh, here it is. It's like halfway between my monitors. Let me put my, yes, the Allen Edmonds are nice shoes. The Park Avenues, beautiful shoes. They're the most beautiful shoes I've ever seen. And I owned a couple of pairs of them, but they stopped being comfortable for me after a while, so I stopped buying them. I don't know what changed about my feet, but something changed. So Sanjay, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So definitely reach out to me. Would be happy to chat about teaching this or any other lectures.
Absolutely.
With you.
I have a human services psychology club, and we do talk about the psychology of money. And cool. I think you'd be perfect as a guest speaker. I'd be happy to bring you in.
Awesome, that'd be great. So basically, getting back to things, love the digression, by the way. I have no problem with that. When people are saying like, I don't want to like distract from the conversation, like this is part of the fun of like, being in a group conversation. Like I want this to be participatory, and like, other people are going to see this on YouTube and they're not going to get the chance to interact like this, but like they'll get the benefit of the questions you guys have asked and the conversation we have as a result of it. And it's great questions. It's great conversation. So keep it coming. Like that's like what this is all about. The Freethinker Institute is about free thinking, right? It's like letting everyone think for themselves. And so whatever thoughts you guys have about what I'm presenting on, I'm happy to like talk about those and we'll get through the lecture, and it's fine if we don't have as much time at the end, as long as we enjoy the path along the way. But we'll get through the presentation before 9 o'clock for sure. It was only like 45 minutes of slides, and so if we have some digressions, we just go a little longer. So that said, so basically you want to put that 15% into either a stock account, like following the investment advice that you think is the best, and I'll tell you how I invest, or you can invest in, put it in a bank to have 6 months of cash flows. That's like if you're out of a job and you have no income coming in, you want to be able to survive for at least 6 months. And with unemployment, it'll be longer than 6 months. And sometimes it takes longer than 6 months to find a job. Hopefully it won't. But you don't want to be desperate or end up being homeless because you didn't have, you were working paycheck to paycheck. So the first thing I recommend is getting an emergency fund with automatic withdrawals. If you put it into investment, it'll grow, which is good. But if you're worried that the stock market is going to crash, you may want it in cash. So now it's time to start saving. So basically, you're going to create 3 more investment accounts: a retirement account, which is called a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA, basically, there's a limit to how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA, a legal limit. However, you'll love this. Even though there's a legal limit to what you can contribute to a Roth IRA, there's something called a backdoor Roth. So if you make enough money that you can contribute, that you're going to be contributing more than the legal limit to the Roth IRA, you just put it into a regular IRA. And at the end of the year, you convert the regular IRA to a Roth IRA, and you get all the benefits of a Roth IRA. What are the benefits? With a Roth IRA, you pay the tax up front. You pay the tax up front, exactly. And you don't pay the tax when you take the money out of the IRA. Now that's great, because what I'm going to show you is the beauty of compounding interests. And I forget the exact quote by one of the founding fathers, but like, the compounding interest is the 8th wonder of the world. It was something like that. Basically, compounding interest is what is going to make this whole thing work. And what it means is the longer you invest money, the better off you are. And so if you put $10,000 in now, when you retire, that's going to be $100,000. It's much better to pay tax on $10,000 now than on $100,000 when you retire. So because you're taking all the money out tax-free at the end. So the way the math works out, you're much better off paying the tax now in almost all circumstances. So your Roth IRA for retirement is much better. And like I said, there's really no practical limit to a Roth because of the backdoor Roth. That's a not super well-known thing, but like now you know it. So use it. Knowledge is power.
Is there any penalty for taking out money from your Roth before a certain age? Oh, okay.
So there. Okay. So when you say is there a penalty, I actually think if the money's in a Roth, because this happened to me, I would consult a tax person. But I can tell you that I actually made a mistake. I took money out of my Roth and I intended to deposit it into another Roth, but because I'm so work focused, I didn't do it for like 6 months. And by the time I tried to deposit it into the other Roth, it turned out that it had like too much time had passed and I couldn't put it into a Roth anymore. And so I just got the money as cash. So apparently, like maybe I paid tax on that. I'd have to ask my accountant. So I would check with your accountant, but I think that you can actually, there are at least like, there's probably a penalty if you take it out normally, but I don't know if there is if you transfer it and you wait. It's an interesting question. That might
I just wanted to know, because I know you pay the taxes up front, and obviously most of these things are age contingent. You pay a penalty if you take them out before, but
so generally I don't recommend taking anything out of your retirement accounts ever. I did in that one case, and it actually turned out to be really good because that amount of money helped me buy my New York City apartment, which has had a great return on investment. But like, that was kind of dumb luck. Like, I highly recommend keeping all your retirement money in your retirement accounts. That said, you can take money out with a sometimes with a penalty, I'm not sure with a Roth IRA whether or not there's a penalty because you've already paid the tax. There may not be. You'd have to check a tax person. I'm not a tax guy. So I know what I don't know, and I don't know that. Sorry.
Yeah, penalty. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
pay a penalty, right, Shaunak? So, but you could look into Seamus if you wanted to, like if you do what I did and you transfer it between accounts and you end up missing the deadline, whether or not there's a penalty for that. Because
Their way of taking it.
I don't remember paying a penalty for it, but it might have come out of my taxes and I just didn't know.
Yeah,
So,
sure. It's just a specific situation with myself.
It's a specific situation, but some of the stuff is super wonky. Like the whole backdoor Roth IRA blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, like people, Roth IRA has legal limits, but you can really essentially get a Roth IRA for however much money you want. And it turned out that that is true, and it's published in many sources.
Sure.
And it's legit, at least right now. Although many tax loopholes get closed, that's probably a tax loophole. I don't think that one's going away anytime soon, but time will tell. So that said, if you have a company match for retirement investment, absolutely match it. With that 7%, company matches are free money, and that a company match means like for every 1% you put into saving investment accounts, they match it with 1% or 0.5% up to some percent. And so whatever they match to, 7% is probably high enough that you're going to get the match, the full match. And I recommend investing up enough that you do get the full match. But that said, invest to get the match, because that match is really free money and it's in your retirement account, which is going to make a lot of money. Sanjay.
Yeah, so related to this, Garrett, I heard, for example, that some people have vested pensions. Even colleges used to. And I know Ford Motor Company, all these companies used to. My question to you is there one advantage to having a pension and doing that where it's vested? It almost doesn't matter, right? Because once it's locked at a certain number, like 8 years, you're fully vested. How does that differ from when you're able to withdraw in the scenario you're talking about? You understand what I'm saying? Like they put in a certain amount of time, now they're fully vested versus what you're describing.
So once I'm not super knowledgeable in pensions, even though I have one, but my understanding is once you're fully vested in a pension, you are going to get a payout on a monthly basis once you retire. But I think the more you pay into that pension, the more money you're going to get when you retire. So the longer you have the pension, the better the payout. But I know that with GE, they were offering like an immediate like cash payout of the pension. And so sometimes you can get bought out of your pension. I ended up not doing that, not because I didn't want to, but again, I worked too many hours and I didn't find the time to connect with someone who could do it for me. So I still have a pension, although I would have rather had the cash at the time. But that said, that's what I know about pensions, and I don't know a lot more.
So interesting. So, and I don't want to digress or anything, but I've been studying a little bit of the international tax laws and the US tax laws and the interplay. I heard that when you retire, you have to max out the US ones. Part of it's deducted in certain countries. I guess the tax laws vary. And then, is that true that from what you pay the taxes here, and Seamus might know, and then you live overseas, but if there's a certain amount that's over, you get taxed. I've even heard cases where you can get taxed double.
So you do get taxed double if you live abroad and you're still a U.S. citizen?
I mean, I don't know. It's a very interesting question. There's a lot of people who do it, and I lived in Mexico actually last year for over half the year, and I'm about to quit my job and go back, and if everything goes according to plan, I'll be all over the place. But that's a question for an expert, because there are a lot of subtleties there, and I'm sure people who are smart know how to do it the best way in their own advantage, like anything else in this world. But you need an expert who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with Seamus, and I was going to say I do know that a lot of people have renounced U.S. citizenship just so they don't have to pay double taxes, because the U.S. has a pretty draconian rule that when you live abroad, you still have to pay U.S. taxes, even if you're living abroad, if you want to retain U.S. citizenship. And so you do end up getting double taxed if you're in another country and you're a U.S. citizen.
That's interesting. 'Cause I have dual citizenship with Ireland just because they have a very lax citizenship requirement because it was poor for a long time and it exported people. So they were like, hey, let's save some of these people come back.
Keep them.
So yeah, it's interesting because it's just in name only. I have a passport and I have citizenship. It's not.
Yeah, and not trying to tell anyone what to do, and I don't want to take anyone in another direction. Giving up your citizenship's not a smart idea. It'll put you on a watch list. First of all, they're going to interview you before you give it up, and you could never get the U.S. Citizenship when you come back.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to go back, you'll never get it. And even if you change your mind or the job changes, it can look attractive, like, oh, I'm going to this other country. And it really does depend. I mean, it's just, I wouldn't know what to say because I looked at, okay, the tax advantages, just as I was putting it, I was studying why Americans do that for the tax laws. I think it's such a risky move. It's a highly personal thing. Like if you're doing that, you maybe are marrying somebody of some other nationality, but I'm just like.
Right. No, I agree with you. It's risky. And I like the US a lot. I think we have lots of very positive attributes and also lots of negative ones, but I think overall it's a great country. I want to retain citizenship for the foreseeable future. But everyone's got to make their own decision. And, if I move to Canada someday, maybe I would change my mind. I've got a lot of nice things to think about Canada. So, I looked up, a friend sent me a thing of the number of years that America has been at war and the number of years that Canada has been at war. And I will tell you, look it up. It's very fascinating. The US has been at war for like 90% of its history. Almost every year in US history, we have been at war, which I found very fascinating and a little bit scary. Whereas Canada has I think a majority of peaceful years in its history. So, that said, I guess I'm a pacifist. Some people might like war a lot. And so they probably don't agree with my take on that. But I don't think that war is generally the right solution. I try to find peaceful solutions whenever possible. Even when a lot of other people would say it's time for war, I'll say, let's try to negotiate. So that said, everyone's got to choose their own path and who to support and why. And I agree with you that it's risky to give up US citizenship. And honestly, even if I ever did move to Canada, I'd probably retain US citizenship anyway. So that said, let's go into the next step, which is put 4% of your auto withdrawal into a house savings fund and put 4% into a major expenses fund, whereas 7% are going into your retirement fund. Sorry, this is my daughter's. Need more floppy stuff? Floppy stuff in there. Tell me more. Sorry, my daughter wants to guest lecture tonight. So you want to say hi? No? So let's go to the next slide. She was going to keep knocking if I didn't open, so I figured I would open. So how to invest your investment money. So this is how I invest my investment money. Basically, I invest in investment funds. This is my daughter. So I invest in index funds, and Vanguard index funds. Vanguard is a not-for-profit, and Vanguard as a not-for-profit is one of the most renowned investment companies in the world. And if you invest in index funds, there are a lot of good things about them. The Dow Jones is investing in big companies. The Russell 2000 invests in small companies. NASDAQ invests in technology companies. S&P invests in another aspect of sort of mid-sized or large, that's the Standard & Poor's index. And basically the good part about investing in one of the major indexes is that you're very diversified. And so you're investing in basically all of the most successful companies in that index. And the major indexes are investing in the most successful companies in their niche. And so when you're doing that, one of the things that most people recommend in investments is to be diversified. And when you invest in an index fund, you are diversified because you're invested in everybody in the index. What you're doing when you buy into an index fund is you're literally buying an equal share of every company in that index. So you're automatically invested in all the winners of the index. So this presents a really interesting opportunity where you're basically invested in the stock market. And in essence, when you invest in the stock market, the returns on the stock market over the last 100 years have been a 10% annual return, on average over the last 100 years. Now, there have been downturns, but there have been really big upturns. And the overall result is that you get a very good return on investment by investing in index funds. And it's much lower risk than picking stocks, which is very high risk, in which case you're competing with professional stock pickers who have millions of dollars to spend on information that you don't have access to. And so as soon as you start picking individual stocks, you're basically taking a big risk that that stock could go up or down, and you're basically betting against all of the professional investors. So it's much higher risk to pick stocks, although you can sometimes get better returns. It's like a casino, except, the house wins in the casino of the stock market. But why not just bet on the house and win every time with a 10% annual return? And that's what I generally do with half of my retirement. Let me let Sanjay go, and then I'll talk about what I do with the other half.
Right, so I love this conversation. So, and I would love your thoughts. Like Warren Buffett also agrees with the index funds, right? But then he has a model portfolio, and you might know that he won't spend money on Bitcoin. He has articles where he bashes Bitcoins. My financial advisor loves Bitcoin. He's made a lot of money with Bitcoin. But he says, Warren Buffett says, I don't care what it makes. He basically says essentially that you want to invest in what you know. He's famous for not investing in internet stocks or technology stocks. But he says to the public, index funds, and people will pay millions of dollars to have lunch with him, right, during his conventions, and he'll give it to charity. And he lives a very humble lifestyle, but he has a model portfolio, like he'll buy companies. So how do you balance that? Like he's giving to the general public, the index funds, and then the idea of buying what you're comfortable with. But then he's buying companies, turning them around, and then he's, what's your take when they're giving the advice for this, and then they're doing this?
When you say they're giving the advice for this and then they're doing this, you mean?
Well, like they're telling the general public. He's saying, if I could give you no other advice, basically, he says, rule number one is, don't lose money. Rule number two, don't lose money. But he's basically saying index funds, just like you said.
Yeah.
But then he also buys companies, and he's very picky on what he invests in. He said, just because somebody wants to do it, he says, stay away from this, and this is why. But he's been very successful. Why is it that these people don't go with the latest trends, and they still are successful, but then they're telling the public to do the index funds?
So I'm going to see if I can.
He's buying stocks.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can come up with a good analogy. It's like,
If I may, Garrett, what he actually says is that if you know what you're doing, if you don't, for the majority of people, they don't know what they're doing. And for them, the best solution is to invest in index funds. That's what he actually says. It said, but if you know what you're doing, if you have conviction in your beliefs, you have analyzed everything. For those kind of people who do this for a living and who are interested in this, it's a different thing for them. He's saying it. There's the general public, and then there's the other public. He's not the general public.
Like that's exactly what I meant, Sean. Again, I was trying to think of an analogy for that, and the way that I would say it is like, I can't come up with a great analogy, but that's really what it comes down to. Is if you're an expert at something, you're gonna operate at a different level than if you're an average, player. And, the general, like for me, like probably if I spent like an hour or two a day, I could do a great job picking stocks.
Yeah, of course.
That's not how I want to
time input too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Who the hell
want my time
to
that
spend
way?
so much time?
And here I can invest in index funds and have a very good return on investment with very little risk. I never have to worry about it. Even if the market tanks, I know it's going to recover in 2 or 3 years anyway, at most 3 to 4 years. Worst comes to worst, if it's like the Depression, 5 or 6 years, if we get, someone doing the wrong fiscal policy in the middle of a depression, we'll end up with 5 to 6 years. But like, all right, like eventually it's going to recover. And probably, that's not going to prevent me from living a happy life anytime in my life, no matter when it happens. And so personally, I'm not going to do the typical investment advice and move over to fixed income. When I get older, I'm going to keep stuff in equities. The typical investment advice is, as you get older, you should shift a higher percentage of your income to fixed income, or your investments to fixed income, rather than equities. But personally, I would rather stay in equities because it's so much of a higher return on investment, that I'd rather stay in equities and take the risk. But everyone has to decide for themselves what they want to do. And yeah, that Shaunak is right. At the end of the day, if you're an expert stock picker, like Warren Buffett makes his living picking, not stocks, but companies to buy, right? He's a portfolio investor, so he buys companies. So he literally buys the entire company. So investing in stocks is like, peanuts to him, right? That's like, like it's like a profession, like Gary Kasparov playing chess against the guy in the park, right? It's not, like his stock picking. He's a Gary Kasparov, and we're the guy in the park. And so we're not going to play chess against Gary Kasparov and think that we're going to win. Although lots of people do that, and they pick stocks when they're investing. Whereas what Warren Buffett recommends people do, because he's a really nice guy and he recommends people what's in their best interest, he says the same thing that I say, which is invest in index funds. That's what I'm doing, because I'd much rather bet on all the winners, safely, securely, in a diversified way, with a really low expense ratio. And the expense ratio, by the way, is how much I pay to the index fund. So Vanguard charges, a fraction of a percent for managing the buying and selling of stocks as they come into and out of the index. And so that's the expense ratio of the index fund. When you have an expense ratio of a mutual fund, it can be, 1, even 2, or even higher than 2% of the assets under management. So that means 1 to 2% of your money is going to the mutual fund. And I can say they pay very well because they have a lot of money. They mint money, mutual funds, and they're making so much money off of the investments of the people that they're investing for, that it's just a very, at the end of the day, even if they slightly outperform the market, the average mutual fund actually does worse than the average index fund after you take into consideration the expenses of the mutual fund. And so even like hiring professional stock pickers and paying them their salary to do it, you end up better off, investing in index funds. And Warren Buffett knows that, and so do I, and that's why we both recommend the same thing. So that said, go ahead.
And I don't want to interrupt. What are your thoughts on emerging markets like the BRICS nations, Brazil?
Now you're getting into my next. So I do take
investing in that.
I do take a little risk. So with my kids, 529, I spent, and with my retirement, I spend about half of my money taking a little bit more risk. And what I do is I look for index funds in indexes that are going to do well based on macroeconomic trends. For example, right now, there's an aging population in the US. So US-based healthcare index funds should theoretically outperform the market. And so I'm invested in, index funds that buy into healthcare, because the healthcare industry is booming, right? Because we have an aging population, and something like 80%, I forget the exact statistic, but it's like a very large percentage of a person's lifetime healthcare expenses are in the last 5 years of life. It's a very large percentage in the last 5 years of life, or the last, something like 5 or less years of life. And so, as we have an aging population of baby boomers, there's going to be a lot more money going into the healthcare industry. And so that industry should get higher than average returns. Now, emerging markets is another one that I've invested in, and I've done very well on it. I started investing in emerging markets about 10 years ago because I was working with developers in India, when I was at GE 20 years ago. And I was like, wow, the economic opportunity working with countries and low-cost countries. It took me 10 years to realize that I should be investing in them. but okay, I figured it out eventually, right? And now what I'm teaching tonight is like the culmination of 20 years of knowledge. Yeah, so I do think that investing in emerging markets is a good investment. And when you're choosing an index fund, you're choosing the best of those like businesses. Now, there are a lot of like scam artists in emerging markets, but when you're invested in an index fund, you're investing in the best of the best. So you generally like sort of systematically avoid the scam artists because, you know, the professional investors are looking very carefully at every one of those companies. And unless they fooled all the professional investors, which Enron did, so sometimes people can, you know, then you're generally pretty safe. Now, that said, emerging markets hasn't always gone up. Like I've had ups and downs, but overall it's been very up. And, you know, my return on investment on my kids' 529, the last I checked, was like something like 20% annualized returns. So it's ridiculously high, you know, better than I expected, to be honest. But it's been a good market, to be honest. So, you know, my kids are 5, so it's been a good market. And so, yeah.
You know, and Garrett, just one thing before you move on. Russia and the Ukraine, you know, the tensions, right? Biden was going to put sanctions and they're escalating that. That's affecting the economy. And the head of the Ukraine, he said he was negotiating with Western powers to be able to settle with Russia just to keep his economy going and to avoid war. He said it's cheaper to avoid war. And then what he's saying is we can stabilize the economy. So there's this backdoor approach. But it looks like, boy, those political tensions, because now he's doing the training exercises, but he withdrew. That's going to affect your emerging markets. It could destabilize the whole thing.
Right.
But it's not for the long term, but it does.
Yeah, not for the long term is what I would say. Is like, as long as we don't get into, you know, anything catastrophic, which, you know, I don't think we will. There have been a few close calls though in the last 50 years with Russia. So, you know, assuming nothing catastrophic, and quite frankly, if something catastrophic happens, like our investments don't matter anymore. Just go find the closest farm and make friends with the farmer. So like, you know, like there's you know, like I agree with you, but like I would say in the long term, like emerging markets are generally, in my opinion, a good bet. So I'm invested in them. But, you know, everyone has to decide for themselves. Like if you want to take a risk on index funds, I recommend looking at macroeconomic trends and, you know, seeing what macroeconomic trend, what indexes align with macroeconomic trends that will help that index do better. So other ones that I'm invested in are like high dividends or increasing dividends. Like people who are increasing dividends or have high dividends are generally, you know, companies that are more successful because they're willing to pay out money to their investors. And then those dividends can come back and you can reinvest them. And so I like those. Those are typically, like from what I've researched, historically outperform the market. So that's why I'm invested in them. Now, what you can get basically, if you make $30,000 a year when you come out of college and your salary goes up by 5% a year, basically when you're 65, given, you know, the average return is a 10% annualized return on the stock market in the last 100 years, you would basically be making a $260,000 salary on $2.6 million of savings in your savings account. If you didn't spend any money in your vacations and your housing fund, which you are going to spend it at some point, you would have almost $4 million in each one of those. Now you're going to spend money from those, and that's the point of having them, is to spend money on them, and you'll get a return on investment on your housing investment, because, like I said, you're paying down your equity as you pay those payments on your mortgage, and you'll eventually have a place to live rent free if you live there for 15 or 30 years. It's lower interest on a 15-year mortgage, but I recommend a 30-year mortgage because you end up paying lower payments, and you can invest the money you save in payments in the stock market, and, you know, you make a higher return on investment that way. So go ahead.
Oh, Garrett, I don't mean to interrupt, but there's this train of thought that the housing that you have is considered an asset. And we're not talking about Airbnb or something like that. But my understanding is different financial advisors say different things. And I don't know what you think. I'm thinking if I'm very grateful for any house that I have, you know, even if it was just out on the street and I had something over me, I'd be grateful having shelter.
Totally.
But the thing is, the house that I have, I don't consider it an asset. Because it's just a place for me to have a roof over my head for my dogs and I love the house.
Right.
But you understand, I can't count on that for, what am I going to count on it for?
Right. But it is an asset because you can always sell it and make money. And the other reason it's an asset is if you didn't have it, you would need to pay someone else to have a place to live. So it's actually not necessarily an asset that is giving you money every month. Although, you know, if you rent out, you know, part of your home, which you can do if you have an extra bedroom, you can rent out an extra bedroom, which I do in New York City, and that helps pay the mortgage. And so you can rent out, you know, and get, you know, a positive financial cash flow by renting out part of your home. And you also have a, you know, a cash outflow that you wouldn't have if it weren't for your home if you live somewhere else. Now, if you want to be homeless, that's another story. If you want to live in an RV, it's another story. Those are options, but not where I want to go. So I look at it this way. So you do need to pay tax when you withdraw the money. If you are not in a Roth IRA, like we talked about, you can be in a Roth no matter how much money you're investing. So highly recommend the Roth. And so let's talk about a little bit of credit card advice. So, you know, we're talking about financial advice. And so I like to give some quick synopsis of what I think is good credit card advice. First of all, a good cash back is 2% plus. Fidelity, Bank of America, and a few others. I think Google cashback credit cards give 2% cash back. 2% cash back adds up to a lot of money if you spend a reasonable amount of money. And it's pretty high cash back. Now you also want 90-day theft and breakage insurance. This insures stuff no matter what happens. Literally, if I buy a new vase that's like $450 and my daughters drop it on the ground and break it, within 90 days, it will be insured. And so it insures against anything. And so, you know, it's a really nice thing to have to give you peace of mind when you buy something new, especially electronics, and you spill water on a, you know, a tablet, then cool, it's covered, you know, if it's under $500 usually. There's an extended 1-year warranty. I will tell you this, companies know when their products break, and they always set the warranty right before their products are going to break. So getting an extra 1-year warranty really, really helps. I can't tell you how many times, like I can think of like 3 or 4 times that I've called on that extended 1-year warranty. You need to have all your documentation in order. So save your documentation. There's, you know, this is not a no effort solution, but if you save your documentation of when you bought something and you have all your receipts, then if it breaks within a year after it goes out of warranty, which it really, like, stuff just very often does, then you can get it covered by your credit card company by being 1 year further than the regular warranty allows. Now, there's also a price match, which is like if you buy something and you find it cheaper anywhere else on the internet, and there are also companies that go out and price match for you. I think they charge money now, but there used to be free ones. I don't use those because I just don't do this very much, but it's a cool thing for anyone that wants to spend the time and effort. And these companies will go out and price match stuff for you and then find you savings on your credit card company. There's also credit cards that have no foreign exchange fees for when you go abroad. If you go abroad for vacations, which my wife and I like to do, when you're in a foreign country, most credit cards will charge a foreign transaction fee. Some credit cards will waive those foreign transaction fees and still have good benefits. But even if the benefits aren't quite 2%, which mine isn't, I think it's 1.5% for the one that waives foreign exchange fees. It's still nice to have a credit card that you can use and bring more than one, because, you know, that one got, you know, the last time I went on vacation, it got fraud charges because I was spending a lot of money abroad and they thought that someone was being fraudulent. And so they shut my credit card down until I could turn it back on again. And so I had to use a backup credit card. So always have a backup credit card, but it's nice to not pay foreign transaction fees when you go abroad. So bank account advice, like they're nice, like Schwab and TD Bank both give like no ATM fees no matter what ATM you use, which is kind of cool. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not always around one of my banks, and so if I go to a random ATM and I use my Schwab or my TD Bank account, then I pay no credit card fees. They basically refund me for all the fees that I pay from the ATM machine, which is kind of cool. There's also TD Bank gives 1 wire a month. Silicon Valley Bank gives either unlimited wires or $500 a month of fees to be reimbursed. Silicon Valley Bank is like a business bank, so they're not as much into personal unless you're like a really high net worth individual, I guess. But they are a good business bank account. SVB gives a 1% interest, which is like extraordinarily high. Most banks are giving like 0.1% interest, so it's like 10 times the interest you're going to get elsewhere. American Express Personal Savings, Ally, and Betterment have higher than average interest rates from the research that I've done. I recommend not paying monthly fees on your bank account. You want to keep the minimum balance so that you don't have to pay a monthly fee. It's expensive to pay, $25 a month on, it's cheaper to, keep a $2,000 a month balance than it is to pay, a $25 a month fee. So that said, questions, this is when I was considering, this is what, the partner that I was doing. So that said, I am happy to take questions, but any questions about the advice, we'll give other, practical trainings or have conversations about practical advice. That's the whole point of the Freethinker Institute. Would love to answer any questions that people didn't ask along the way. Anything that you feel like would add additional value to the talk. Go ahead, Sanjay, you look like you want to talk.
Garrett, I was going to say, if you do accept PayPal, like if we wanted to make a donation for your time today,
absolutely.
what is your PayPal?
I think it's garrettlang@gmail.com, GARRETTLANG@gmail.com. And yeah.
Also, Quicken, I got that software. I'm going to try to use it. It's not exactly investment software, but I think one of the steps based on what you're saying is, boy, I got to learn how to track everything. Right now I use my bank statements, credit card statements, but it's almost like a crapshoot.
So I actually have someone that I can put you in touch with who's great. And what she does is she has like a, so they provide like, they basically have like an app that connects with all your bank accounts and your statements and stuff. And like, you can try it out. Like I haven't used it extensively, but like I've used it a little bit, and it basically connects to all your bank accounts and like puts all your cash flows in one place, all your cash inflows and your cash outflows. And I actually wanted to build an app like this, and they already built it, and it's pretty cool. And it takes all your cash inflows, your cash outflows, and puts it all into one place. And then they look at your insurance and like a bunch of like, it's like a financial health assessment of your financial situation. I think they normally look at like, people, depends on your income, but like, I'm happy to put you in touch with the person that I know that does this. And, so reach out to me and I can connect you with her and see if it might be a fit for you to work with her. She's great. And, they do sell products, so be aware of that. That's how they make money, is they sell products. But like, she's a pretty nice person, so like use your own judgment about like whether or not you want to buy the products or not. But like, they offer the service that I'm talking about for free, and they offer like free advice that I benefited from, and they have a lot of connections in the financial services space of like referrals that they can make to lawyers and estate lawyers and stuff like that. And all the people that she's referred me to have been great. So, I can, say she's like a, like I think I'm a pretty reasonable judge of character, and she seems like a very high integrity person. And she's been more helpful to me than I have been to her. And I hope someday I'll be helpful to her, and I'll definitely try to.
Absolutely. If you could do that, Garrett, I'd appreciate it. Also in your email to me through Meetup, if you wanted to send me a message, if you could let me know her contact information or what to do, that'd be great. Also, I returned from Italy June 5th. Cool. And if you're available after June 5th, I'd love to hang out in New York. That'd be just,
that'd be great. let me know when you can come up. Just give me a couple, like a month's notice, and give me a month's notice, and I would love to meet up. I put my email in the chat. I will, I would love it if you would not mind reaching out to me with the agenda of what we talked about, because I did not take notes, although I'm normally an incessant note taker. I have to admit I didn't take notes with you, and I apologize for that. But if you can remember what we talked about following up on and reach out to me, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Garrett. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone can donate something to you in PayPal. It's definitely worth, definitely the session was.
Thank you. Again, like I'm happy to let you guys make the money first. I'm an altruist, and so I want to do someone else a favor first. And if I can make you $3,000 in the next couple of years, cool. Then I would love for you to donate. If people want to beforehand, that's great. That, I haven't solicited donations. Actually, if you donate, Sanjay, you'd be the first one, which I would appreciate too. But my goal is to, with the Free Thinker Institute, is to do good in the world. I actually hope that I make money with my for-profit, and then I won't even accept donations, or, maybe I would accept them, but I've not really intentionally solicited them. Like tonight's fee was more of a fee to get people to take the lecture seriously. Although I would love for that to work out that way. But my goal is to do someone else a favor, and then, sometimes people do favors for me first, and then I try to do favors back to them. I'm a big believer in the law of reciprocity, which is, if someone does you a favor, try to do 2 favors back for them. And, that's how I try to live my life, is surrounding myself by people who live by that law, because in doing that, we help support each other. And that's part of the philosophy behind the Free Thinker Institute, of attracting people who want to be the best version of themselves and helping each other be that best version of ourselves. We sort of practice that law of reciprocity, where we help each other in very positive ways.